Good evening, all. I want to call this meeting to order. This is a regular City Council meeting for the City of Coquitlam, and it is our last meeting with, that will begin with 2 empty seats, and in a moment we'll be fixing that.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item this evening is the oath of office for our 2 Councillor-Elects. I ask the Mayor to invite our inaugural party into the chambers.
I would invite them to please enter the chambers and invite us all to stand up as the inaugural party enters. I invite you all to stay standing, and I would please ask Councillor Terry O'Neill, our council singer, to please lead us in our national anthem. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Worship. I now invite the Honourable Judge, Sheni Dasa, to administer the oath of office to Councillor-Elect Chris Wilson.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I get you to read the oath.
I, Chris Wilson, do solemnly affirm that I am qualified to hold the office of Councillor for the City of Coquitlam, to which I have been elected. I have not, by myself or any other person, knowingly contravened the community charter respecting vote buying or intimidation in relation to my election to the office. I will faithfully perform the duties of my office and will not allow any private interest to influence my conduct in public matters. As required by the community charter, I will disclose any direct or indirect financial interest I have in a matter and will not participate in the discussion of the matter and will not vote in respect to the matter. And I will abide by my duty to respect the confidentiality of any records held in confidence by the City of Coquitlam until the record is released to the public as lawfully authorized or required, and any part of a council meeting or council committee meeting that was lawfully closed to the public until the council or committee discusses the information at a meeting that is open to the public or releases the information to the public. Sworn, solemnly affirmed by the above-named councillor at Coquitlam, British Columbia, on this 18th day of November 2013.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Councillor-Elect Benita Zarrillo to come forward.
I, Benita Zarrillo, do swear solemnly affirm that I am qualified to hold the office of Councillor for the City of Coquitlam, to which I have been elected. I have not, by myself or any other person, knowingly contravened the community charter respecting vote buying or intimidation in relation to my election to the office. I will faithfully perform the duties of my office and will not allow any private interest to influence my conduct in public matters. As required by the Community Charter, I will disclose any direct or indirect financial interest I have in a matter and will not participate in the discussion of the matter and will not vote in respect to the matter. And I will abide by my duty to respect the confidentiality of any records held in confidence by the City of Coquitlam until the record is released to the public as lawfully authorized or required, and any part of a council meeting or council committee meeting that was lawfully closed to the public until the council or committee discusses the information at a meeting that is open to the public or releases the information to the public.
Thank you. I would ask that we stand for the departure of our honor guard. Please be seated.
Well, on behalf of all of Council, I want to welcome our two new members. Those seats have been empty too long. We're glad to have you aboard. We've got lots of work, and in fact, they've been at work all day today and for several weeks now. They've been working hard, and I, on behalf of Council, want to welcome them. Bonita Zarrillo, mother of three, a businesswoman, a member of her school PAC. She sat on the city's Arts and Culture Committee, the Economic Development Committee at the Chamber of Commerce. I know that her parents are in the room, local residents. In fact, I think they were able to walk over here. It's great to have you on board, Bonita. Welcome here. Chris Wilson, who many of us know from Kids Sport, from the sports community. Many of us know him as having a perpetually red nose. Sorry, from his involvement in Operation Red Nose and many other charitable efforts. He's pretty passionate about this community. Now, he brings to this council some fighting skills. An Olympic wrestler, but truly an all-around great guy. Great to have you both on board. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Sure.
Item 1 of this evening's agenda is the minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, November 4th. The recommendation is that these minutes be approved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Hodge, second by Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is the minutes of the Riverview Lands Advisory Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 9th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Councillor Hodge, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is the minutes of the Multiculturalism Advisory Committee meeting of Wednesday, October 16th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Chair Asmundson, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is the minutes of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting of Tuesday, November 5th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Councillor Aspenson, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5 is our first report of staff. This is a development variance permit authorization for reduction in the rear lot line setback for proposed subdivision at 1286 Hollybrook Street. Prior to reading forward the recommendation, I invite the mayor to call for speakers.
With development variance permits, we run a small public hearing. Are there any speakers on this item? Are there any people in the audience who want to make known their views on this item? Are there any speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any speakers to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk.
The recommendation is that council approve the signing and sealing of this DVP and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Hodge. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 6 is our second development variance permit. This is for, again, a reduction in the rear lot line setback for proposed subdivision, this time at 1290 Hollybrook Street. And I invite the chair to call for speakers.
Same rules. Are there any speakers to this item? Any speakers to this item? Third and final time, are there any speakers to this item? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk.
Staff recommendation is that council approve the signing and sealing of this DVP and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute it.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Sikora. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7 is consideration of fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw 4408 and the development permit authorization for proposed apartment building and townhouse development 514 to 554 Foster Avenue and 636 to 640 Aspen Street. The recommendation from staff is that council give fourth and final reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw 4408 and that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute the DP.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Aspenson, second by Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. To the planning department, they meet all the parking requirements.
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, yes, if, just give me a moment here. There's a section in the staff report dealing with parking. Council should note that the project is located within the Coquitlam TDS, Transit-Oriented Development Strategy area, the shoulder area. So within that area, there's certain provisions for reduction of parking requirements, and the applicant is taking advantage of that for the visitor parking portion for the townhouse units only. For the visitor portion, normally for that number of units would be 21 spaces, so they want to reduce it down to 19 spaces, so it's less than a 5%. But in lieu of that, what they're doing is they are, because again, under the TDS strategy, there's the ability to provide other measures to cover off that parking need. In this case, the applicant has volunteered to provide preloaded transit passes for the 107 townhouse units up to a value of $30,000 as an incentive for people to make a habit of using transit rather than relying on parking. The rest of the parking for the project is more than met. As a matter of fact, there's they have an additional 58 stalls. Some of those are in tandem, and some are what we call apron spaces scattered throughout the project. And then as well, there's approximately 57 new on-street parking. Now, obviously, we don't count on-street parking as meeting bylaw requirements, but for those that are familiar with that stretch of Foster along there, there's that frontage is quite broken up by driveways. With this project, the driveways will be removed, so there'll be the ability for continuous parking along there. So overall, they meet and exceed the parking requirements with the exception of that minor variance for the visitor from 21 to 19.
So you're talking about street parking to accommodate this development?
To the chair, no, I want to make clear, on-street parking is not factored into the calculation of parking provision. But I just do note that with this development, there is that ability, because they're redoing that frontage, they're taking out all the driveways, so there is that ability. But no, on-site, they more than meet their parking needs.
So they're meeting the 1.35?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that over the last year and a half or so, we've talked a lot about housing affordability in Coquitlam. And I think one of the most effective ways to improve housing affordability is simply to increase the supply. And it's worth noting that these new 196 units are going to be taking the place of what used to be 18 single-family homes. So it's 178 new homes that we are creating here with this. I think that's a tremendous step forward for the city in an area that can support that density, where rapid transit is coming, so I'm very pleased to support this.
Thank you. And, yep, there are more spaces than required. It's kind of neat to see that happen. Further discussion? Seeing none, the question is fourth and final, and a DP. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 8 concerns the City of Coquitlam liquor licensing application referral review policy. The two-part recommendations that Council adopt the proposed policy as set out in the report, and 2, that the charge for liquor license applications be amended to make $1,100 the base fee, and that the actual cost of postage for the mail-out also be borne by the applicant.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councillor Hodge, second by Councillor Aspenson. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. On this one, I noticed that the fees for applications is $1,100. What was it before? $1,000?
Mr. Clerk.
The fee before was $1,100 inclusive of postage, and what we are asking is that we keep the fee at $1,100, but that we add the actual cost of postage. What we discovered is in some areas the postage is quite low and it can fit within that $1,100 fee, but if you were to open something near this part of town, for example, the postage alone would take the majority of the fee.
Okay, and going a little further, I'm just going to I noticed that there's some comments about the patios closing at 9 o'clock in the evening, or 9 p.m. You know, I think that we should not be going into trying to steer what the liquor branch in Victoria may do with the government. The government is studying this whole liquor premises on what kind of hours they should operate. How can they operate? Can they put liquor in grocery stores or whatever? There's many comments out there on the street. And I don't think for 1 minute that we should be trying to get ahead of the liquor control branch and trying to set up policies that we should have in Coquitlam. You know, I think myself personally, there should be a standard. Now, you know, whether Victoria listens to it or not, I don't know. But I think there should be a standard where the restaurants can serve up till a certain time, and the pubs till a certain time. But we have pubs that close at 12 o'clock at night. We got pubs that close at 2 o'clock in the morning. I think it's very, very unfair to have that kind of variation in our community, where there's pubs taking advantage, have an upper hand, one over the other. I think it's very, very dangerous precedent. And I'm glad that we don't have any nightclubs here in Coquitlam. I'm just very, very happy about that, because nightclubs have been nothing but problems. What happens that they leave a pub, say at midnight, oh, I need another drink, and they need that drink like a hole in the head. Where do they go to the pub?
Nightclub.
Next, you know, the insultant, you know, somebody may walk in with his girlfriend or his wife, and, you know, I mean, a lot of crazy things happen in cabarets. I closed one down that I took over. When I took over a hotel, I had a cabaret in there. I'll tell you, it lasted about 3 days and it was gone, because we had nothing but fights and problems, because they could drink till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. It was crazy. Just very unruly, and noise out in the parking lot, fights in the parking lot wasn't worth it. So I think that we should not try and maybe start a policy way ahead of the liquor control branch in Victoria, the provincial government, what they might do. That's just one of my comments, because I've been in this business for many years, many years. Okay, thank you.
One of the advantages here, of course, we won't be having differential. This policy would suggest that we'd have a consistent start time, closing time, generally speaking, across the city, rather than different ones across different establishments in the same category. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Just a few questions to staff. So it's our rules that people who want to open at 9 a.m. on Saturdays or Sundays or whatever, it's treated as a standalone. They'll come for each application, is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct. What we've tried to do with the policy, the proposed
No,
policy.
that's good. I just wanted to make sure, because I've read this and then I read this, and public consultation process, is it going to apply to both liquor and food primary?
The consultation processes with the LCLB referrals to the city, that'll be handled by Jay in the city clerk's area. But it should be noted that the referrals the city gets for food primary liquor licensing applications is limited. It's
that's why I'm asking
patron
the question.
participation and serving after midnight. So, whereas with the liquor primary establishments, either for new ones or amended ones, the city would receive a wider range of referral applications.
But the problem is, folks, is that it's really expensive and difficult to get a liquor primary license. And the government isn't giving out a whole bunch of them either. But food primary licenses, for a liquor primary license, you have to go through all kinds of checks and RCMP checks and everything else. If I want a food primary, I just have to go buy a hole on the corner, start flipping pancakes and apply, and it wouldn't matter if I'm a criminal, with a 25-year record. At a food primary license, there's hardly any consultation, there's hardly any checking. And the problem is that we end up with the downtown core that we're trying to make beautiful with great places to go to, but then they become problems for the RCMP, or they can, and that's my problem. I really think that we need to give probably even a higher level of scrutiny to the food primary, because the government doesn't do a higher level of scrutiny to the food primary. But they make anyone who wants to open a bar or a pub, it's just horrendous. And what we end up with is a whole bunch of places that are fun to go to, but we have a whole bunch of citizens that get pretty upset when we're just dealing with food primaries that are now having music, which is fun. Nobody likes to dance more than me. So have lots of dancing, singing, and drinking, and it becomes almost cabaret style in that you're having dinner and dancing and that, and yet we're not giving any scrutiny to the people that are opening it. No record checks, no anything, and that's the province's job. But we end up with the problem on the street, and so I don't know how much input we're going to have with all these liquor licenses, but they can be a problem, and I see everybody nodding. So,
Your Worship, if I can, certainly there are challenges, and even with this policy, if it's supported by Council, there will remain challenges. Just simply the way the system's set up, and as Councillor Reid has noted, that is the comparative processes for liquor primary versus the food primary. I think staff have recognized that, and that's why with the guidelines that we're recommending for the closing times, there is that differential, a 1-hour differential between liquor primary and food primary. Liquor primary for the weekends would be up to 2 o'clock in the morning. Sunday through Thursday would be to 1 o'clock, whereas the food primary would be 12 o'clock for the weekdays and up to 1 o'clock on the weekend. Those are just maximum limits. Council, in its discretion in considering an application, could look at the location, other issues in that area, what impacts might be, and in fact, in the end, Council may land on an earlier closing time that they'd be recommending back to LCLB. So the closing times are sort of set. There's guidelines for Council, but it doesn't fetter Council from reaching a different conclusion.
Okay, and does it fetter us when we're talking about patios, when we would like them to close outside patios at 9 o'clock? So under these rules and the provincial legislation, they don't have to. We're relying on a good neighbor policy for them to do so. But could we make closing patios, maybe not 9 o'clock, but whatever's appropriate? Could we do that as a condition of business license? Is that a way around the legislation? Just thought I'd ask.
Your Worship, we explored that. Theoretically, yes, that is a possible avenue. It would present some challenges for us, particularly when it comes to enforcement. And also, too, we need to be careful that, again, at the end of the day, the approving authority is the LCLB. It's a provincial authority. They're referring it to the City of Coquitlam, ultimately the Council, for your comments and support or non-support. So we have to be careful that if we put some additional regulation, if we're layering on regulation, we can't be inconsistent with what LCLB might set. So we wrestled with this, because when we came back just before the summer break, you'll recall we had the draft policy, and that was one of the concerns of Council. What about these patios? And so we went away and did some research, checked out some of the other municipalities did it. We checked with bylaw enforcement in terms of what's the pattern in terms of the call-out for complaints for these patio areas. And so we came to the conclusion that for the 9 o'clock closing during the week and up to midnight on the, or 11 o'clock, pardon me, on the weekends. And the approach we've taken is, rather than layering it on as regulation from the City of Coquitlam, what we've done is that in the referral back to LCLB, we had asked them to include that, build that in as a condition of their issuance of the liquor license or amendment of the liquor license. It's certainly there in the policy protocol, but we would be expecting that the province would then address that. And I believe there was consultation with ministry staff on that, and they seemed comfortable with it. So that would be staff's recommendation.
Those rules coming out, Mr. McIntyre?
I'm sorry?
When is the province coming out with their full redo? The end of November, I heard.
Yeah, that's the other uncertainty right now, and we've tried to address that in the report. There's some things that have come out that have been made publicly available. Our take is that we haven't seen the final report that's going through to the minister. How long that'll take for their internal review, how long it takes to get to the legislature, what in fact goes forward. We're saying that we really need this. We feel that we need this policy right now. We've got a number of pending applications. If the province comes back and if a whole new liquor licensing regime, which we kind of doubt, but we don't know for sure what the future is, obviously then we'd have to bring this back for reconsideration. But at this time, and we consulted with LCLB staff on a number of points, and they seemed comfortable and supportive of how we're going forward.
And my last comment is that in designing and planning our town center and high-density transit-oriented density, we have put commercial at the bottom of most high-rises. And because it's easy for anybody to go and open a restaurant, that's a really easy thing to do in the bottom of a high-rise, and get a liquor license and get a band and flip pancakes and have a really fun place. Unfortunately, if we had 2 or 3 of those in a small area, then you end up with a tremendous problem, possibly, for the people that are living in the high-rises. So I'm really concerned about the patio and how many of these establishments we're going to allow in any given area.
Your Worship, those are all very good points, and in fact, I think there's something that not just Coquitlam wrestles with, but I understand the City of Vancouver does as well, and they've got a real active downtown, and you've got thousands of people living in Yaletown and loving it, but part of it is the attraction of the nightlife, and there's that potential conflict between a lot of activity happening late into the evening at the ground level and people trying to sleep 2 stories above. Obviously, attention to design is important there. If you can get commercial concentrations and more of the later night and maybe liquor primary operations in those locations, and those would be the sort of things that staff would identify when referrals come forward for council's consideration. And I guess the third point, I believe we talked about this earlier on in this process, is that maybe when we get into the city center area plan update, we might want to think about some policy direction around...
I think we have to, and I am much more comfortable with liquor primary because of all the security checks that they go through rather than food primary. Thank you.
Well, excuse me, on that last point, I too think that we're almost more protected with liquor primary than with food primary. Food primary, you're allowed in it if you're underage. It's a restaurant after all, and so many of our food primary restaurants, quasi-restaurants, are actually behaving as bars. They're built as bars. They're designed to be bars. In fact, there's one not far from here. The largest component in the building is the bar, and lots of televisions, and it essentially is in the ground floor of a residential tower. So with a patio, you end up with the potential for these folks that moved into a tower with a restaurant in the ground floor, ending up with a tower, in a tower that has a bar underneath them, or at least a business that acts like a bar. And there's one not far from where I live that clearly is designed as a bar. It's a space that was created as a restaurant. So what we're trying to do, I think, is we're trying to balance the protection of our neighborhoods with the needs of our residents who are looking for a good meal, for a night out, and our needs may well be different. I think I would disagree with the call to leave it all up to the province. I don't think that it would be appropriate for us to take the rules that belong in the downtown core and that work in the downtown core in Yaletown and force them into a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs, quiet neighborhood pub in the suburbs, where the neighborhood may well have a different perspective, and in fact the pub owner may well have a different perspective about the type of entertainment he's providing. So I think we should be very engaged in this process. I think leaving it up entirely to the province is, I think, wrong. I think we need to have some influence on the way the province evaluates this. I note, in fact, that one of our MLAs is right here, someone who used to occupy a seat right up at the table here, Councillor Selina Robinson, now MLA Selina Robinson, and I know that the province is asking us for our position, our opinions, and I think we should express them to them very strongly. But I also think that we should also take the necessary steps to protect our neighborhood, to make sure that the businesses in Coquitlam fit into Coquitlam in a way that the residents of Coquitlam would appreciate. That's not to say no fun by any means. I want us to have lots of vibrant businesses, particularly here in our downtown core, but I also want the residents that live here to be respected in their neighborhood. This is their neighborhood, first and foremost. So I look forward to this policy establishing some overview of how Coquitlam views these establishments, and wrestling a little bit with the challenge created by the fact now that almost every restaurant has the potential to be a bar, and in fact to be much louder than the neighborhood pub that we used to have in our neighborhoods. So I'll go to Councillor Hodge now.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to see this come forward. When I first came on the council, I remarked that how we were getting application after application, and what became apparent to me was that we were setting policy one application at a time, and it was a very ad hoc way of dealing with all the applications that we're getting. And so I'm pleased to see that we're now, at least giving applicants and our residents some general idea of what we're going to accept. I think what we're aiming to do is to level the playing field, and also we're sending a message to applicants that what we will and won't accept. So it's a costly and time-consuming process to go through an application, and so now at least we're giving them some direction and some guidance by doing this. I'm also pleased that we're going to continue in the role of making comment on the applications. I know of other jurisdictions where they don't, where the application goes straight to Victoria, and the local residents don't get that opportunity to be engaged in the process. And I think that's important that we engage our residents in this. It's always a challenge. We want people to enjoy themselves responsibly. We want people to have fun in our community. But at the same time, we want to protect the peace and quiet of our neighborhoods and respect the rights of residents. And it's always a balancing act or a compromise. But I'm hoping that through this policy, we're at least making strides in that direction. I recognize that the whole issue of liquor control and that is being reviewed by the provincial government when there may be some changes coming. But I suspect that any changes that are recommended, if they do impact this area, will probably be months, if not a couple of years, coming into play. And in the interim, at least we can allow the people or the businesses that have applications in the process to proceed, and at least we've given them some guidance. So I'm very pleased to see this come forward, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Aspenson.
Well, thank you very much. I think Councillor Reid and I have been on this issue for a few years now, and we've been pushing for some changes. We made some changes earlier, and I think one of the issues we've always talked about, it's been around the table, is the blurring between what a pub was and what a restaurant is. And most places you'll see with restaurants now look more like a bar nightclub than they do a restaurant today. And so we've asked the province for clarification. We've had some other issues through the clerk's office. We've been back and forth on this a couple of times. I do think, though, that with the applications that have been coming forward to us, that what we'd asked the staff to do in the reports come away, and what you've done is with standardizing the process as to which applications and how they come forward, how they're going to be handled, and that we're all going to have, we used to have the question to council, do you want public consultation or do you not want public consultation? And then it would go out and we get our, now it's standardized, they go out, the clerk's office, it's clear for everybody. So I think there's been a good job on it. I do like the ad in, and we put about the patios. They can be a nuisance and an issue, and I think by putting the restrictions, even if we don't have the full control, I think most businesses will respond and act accordingly, because I think all businesses in this area want to be good neighbors and have a good reputation with the people that live in their neighborhood. So I'm going to support this, and I thank staff for the good job they've done on this.
Thank you. And Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the policy applies to applications referred by the Liquor Control and Licensing Board, or licensing branch. And I'd like to be clear, what's the normal practice? Does the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch refer all applications to the city, or do they distinguish between food primary, liquor primary, or pizza, or fast food, or do we see them all, or do we know?
We do not see them all. The primary difference being that those food primaries that close at midnight are not referred to the city at all. There's no process in which the city provides input into that. So when they seek hours after midnight or patron participation or things like that, and liquor primary, certainly all new liquor primaries and changes to existing liquor primary come through the city.
So in simple terms, a food primary license holder seeking to be perhaps more like a bar would find themselves referred, most likely.
Depending on, again, where they fall within that.
Hours they chose?
Yeah. Well, the example I might use is the one that the mayor recently referred to that is just down the street. It is now open, and there was no liquor license referral to the city of Coquitlam because it is operating as a restaurant, closing at midnight, is my understanding.
And so in those circumstances, because there's no referral to us, there is no fee, there is no consultation.
And that has been true for restaurants, food primaries, since before I arrived at the city, many years now.
Thank you.
The difference, though, is that there used to be a rule involving the serving of food. So you couldn't be a bar. You were actually a restaurant. You had to buy an order of fries in order to have 7 beer.
I think many people at a certain age in their life went to places where the question was, do you have the intention of eating?
Yeah, you have the intention of eating. Yes, that's right. Could I have a bowl of peanuts, please?
To which the right answer, to which they were thinking, please say no.
Councillor Reid.
I just want to confirm on number 2 that the charge for liquor license applications be amended. So if we had a food primary that was sent to us, could we also charge them?
Certainly, if there's a consultation for all liquor license applications, food and liquor primary, that would include restaurants seeking hours after midnight.
So it would include both?
Yes, absolutely.
Then I'm a happy girl. Thank you. I know. That's the only way we get any say.
Oh, Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you. You know, you can go to restaurants with your kids and have a drink, and have dinner, and have a family kind of duty where you talk to your kids and everything else. You know, the one thing that really bothers me that has got to be changed for sure is our festivals. You have a festival, guess what? You can, if you bring the kids to the festival, the kids can go over there and have some chips, and they sit by themselves while you can go over this side and have a beer. You cannot have a beer with your kids. How silly is that? You know, those are some of the laws that are so antiquated it's not even funny. And you know, to me, I think that, you know, whether it be restaurants or pubs, you know, I think the majority of our restaurants are not pubs. Far from it. They comply pretty good. I've been in many restaurants where, you know, I don't see them being a pub whatsoever. Do they try and attract people that are going to have a drink or two? Of course. That's the purpose of existing and being in business. I was in that business for 50 years, so I know what I'm talking about, you know. But certainly, you know, I think we should have a standard. And, you know, talking about patios, number one, we have restaurants and a patio where they can go and have dinner and drinks and that type of deal. And yeah, the people will complain upstairs. Well, you know something? Why didn't they check with the city what's going to be below them before they moved in? Which is like, you know, we had the gravel operators for 50 years up here, or 70 years, or 80 years, and then the residents came along further on and they start complaining about the gravel operations, how noisy it is. Well, you know, they should check what's in there, you know, to somehow say to a restaurant that has had a patio outside and the people want to have dinner, say at 10, 11 o'clock at night and have a beer or two, and they're talking and laughing. Well, sure, it's going to disturb people upstairs, but they should check when they're buying into a place what's going to be below them. So those are some of the things that I think what we're trying to do is police for the people in the city, and I don't think for 1 minute that it's our responsibility to police every resident and every operation in our city. The businessmen are businessmen. Okay? Thanks.
Yeah, keeping in mind that in some instances, of course, the people move in and then someone buys the retail facility underneath and builds a restaurant. It doesn't get referred to us. It's now a bar. And that's happened. It happens regularly in the suburbs, right, in communities around here. It happened a couple of blocks from here. And that can be a challenge. And so I think we have to make sure, but I'll tell you, when Councillor Sikora brings up festivals, we don't have enough time tonight to deal with that issue, because it is absolutely ridiculous to require the operator of, well, for Canada Day, for example, we install 2 fences. They're 6 feet apart. And that's the rule. They have to be 2 fences, and they have to be 6 feet apart so that you can't pass a beer across the open space, unless you throw it, I guess. And of course, there has to be guards all around it and everything like this, so that when mom and dad want to have a beer and they've got their 2 kids with them, well, the kids are over there sitting, or else mom is having a drink and dad's with the children, and then they swap. It's really quite ridiculous. You go to other communities and other provinces, and it's like you're in a restaurant. You're allowed to order a beer to your table when your children are there. It probably should be some rationalization of the, I think, immature, ridiculous liquor licensing rules associated with festivals. We want our community to have fun. We want our families to have fun. It doesn't have to involve alcohol, but where we have a beer garden, we've had one of our festivals essentially pull out because, and fold up, because they couldn't get to the point where they could meet the liquor licensing rules. They had so many so many security guards and the various fences, and it just became unworkable. And as a result of that, Blue Mountain Music Festival is no more. And that's a real shame. I think we lose great events when we're not intelligent about the regulations we impose upon them. And so we should be pushing hard to have the province recognize the inconsistencies related to liquor licensing for festivals, in the same way that they appear to be focusing a lot of attention now on bringing up into the 21st century some of the liquor licensing rules in British Columbia about restaurants and liquor primary establishments. Okay, so the recommendation is a new policy and $1,100 base fee. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Item 9 concerns the 2014 council meeting schedule and the 2014 acting mayor schedule. Prior to putting the recommendation on the floor, I just want to notice a proposed staff proposed change that the council meeting currently proposed for March 17th be moved forward 1 week to March 10th. If that is acceptable to council, what I would say is the staff recommendations that council approve the 2014 council meeting schedule as amended and the 2014 acting mayor schedule as set out in the report.
So moved. Second. Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Hodge. All in favor? Oops, now you've added. Okay, Councillor Sikora. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You know, the problem that I have is I've mentioned every year, and I'll mention again. You know, I don't know how we do it, but the fact is that, you know what, we have a committee meeting, we have a regular council meeting, we had a closed council meeting, and a public hearing all in one night. You know, it takes time, it wear and tear on the politicians for sure. You know, like today, mind you, it's a budget meeting. Today we start at 9 o'clock in the morning. And here we are, we're not finished yet, and so probably it'll be 12-hour a day, each, you know, sitting straight 12-hour talking about issues. And I don't think that anybody can be sitting for 12 hours and be alert as they are to begin with on a 12th hour. So, you know, to me, and to me, the public hearings, one of these days we're going to get caught, and really badly. Because I remember back in 1973, 1974, we had to move a public hearing to a gym. There was that many people turn out. There's about 600 people turn out to a public hearing. And I'll tell you, it went till 5 o'clock in the morning. And then we had a council meeting after that went to about 6:30 in the morning. And my first meeting was the next morning at 7:30. So let's see the date, what happened. So, you know what, to me, I think that, you know, this certainly can be split up. I mean, you know, we have a public hearing, and right away we have to give it fourth and final reading. And yet it might take a year and a half to get to the public hearing, or to even get the public hearing going, or 9 months for sure, a year for sure. You know, so, you know, I don't know what the big hurry is, you know, but I think that, you know, we need to sit as a council and streamline it. I know it can be streamlined very, very easy. We don't need to put that burden all on one day on any council member. It should streamline it. And there's very, very many ways of streamlining. I mention this every year, and I'm going to mention it again. And I keep mentioning every year as long as I can. Keep mentioning that the fact is I think it's very, very unfair. The fact public hearing, council in committee, closed council meeting, and a regular council meeting all in one night. We start sitting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a council in committee. We have about 15 to 25 staff sitting there from 2 o'clock till 7 o'clock at night. Why? You know, why waste all those hours? If they got no work to do in their offices, they can be more productive and more valuable than listening to us discuss issues. Of course, it can't be. So those are it's expensive on a budget, very expensive on a budget to begin with. That's wasting taxpayers' money like I've never seen before. So those are things I'm bringing up, and I'll bring it up, keep bringing it up, because I think it's a terrible, terrible way. But however, council members are buying it, so I guess I'm the only guy that is opposed to it.
Okay. Well, We do have, of course, council sets the schedule. This is council's vote right now, and if there's a motion to change it, we can certainly entertain changing it. There's never 25 staff. We can't fit 25 people in that room.
I challenge you, Mayor. I've got a sheet.
Okay, and then there's 25 staff.
I will show you that there is
That's
25.
okay, and okay, fair enough.
I challenge you anytime.
Okay, so there's 25 staff.
Yes.
But we've now provided laptops for most of the staff so that when they do attend those meetings, they're able to get work done. But they're there primarily for when that question comes up that requires them. Council quite often calls upon a member of staff who's in the committee meeting for clarification of a point, or whether some particular provision meets the test of the legislation and that sort of thing. We're constantly, though, evaluating those who are in the room to make sure that we have the right staff there. We don't want extra staff during those meetings, and we do want to be as efficient as possible, which is why we try to get through so much work in one day. If there's a better way to do it, I'm certainly prepared to do that. I'm here at City Hall every day for typically 10 or 12 hours a day, so we'll set the meetings anytime you want. But I suspect Council keeps encouraging us to have a lot of the meetings on Monday and then some more on Wednesdays, and I think that seems to be working out quite well. We've got a lot of work done today. Granted, it was an exhausting day. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Gee, I'm not exhausted yet, but I'm getting that way. But I appreciate Councillor Sikora's remarks and his concerns about the workload, and I have to assume that he's concerned for the welfare of myself and some of my other colleagues, because I have to say that despite all the workload, it does not seem to have done Councillor Sikora any harm at all.
No.
12 hours.
That's right. And so I'm perfectly happy with the schedule as proposed. It's similar to what we have done for the past year. It seems to me to have worked well for us in the recent past. And I'd always be willing to listen to someone's proposal that we do something a bit different, but it will work for me. I did have one question for staff. I noticed the acting mayor's schedule ends on the 1st of December, and I'm guessing that means that's council inaugural day following the general election.
That is correct.
Thank you. I like to plan ahead. Thanks.
There you go. Okay. The motion is as revised. That's the meeting on the 10th of March instead of the 17th. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. The motion carries. For this next item, I think there are a couple of new people who may wish to move in second.
Item 10 concerns the 2013 by-election results, and the report is before you for information. Oh, sorry, to be received for information.
Receipt is moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Zarrillo. Is there any debate?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm hoping this passes. Actually, I do see a couple of of the candidates who ran in that election, also in the audience, Mr. Bell and Ms. Towner, but they don't get to debate today. They've debated enough during the campaign. All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries with enthusiasm.
Item 11 is a notice of motion that was introduced at the last council meeting by Councillor O'Neill and seconded by Councillor Asmundson. Following a series of whereas clauses, it says, therefore be it resolved that Coquitlam Council call on the Federal Minister of Justice to heed the advice of both the CACP and the FCM by directly implementing the CACP's Resolution 09-2008, and that this resolution of Coquitlam Council be forwarded to the FCM for consideration and support at its next convention. By procedure, Councillor O'Neill has the honour to speak first.
Yes, thank you. I think it speaks for itself. Some people may wonder, why now, why this? The federal government has moved in some directions to strengthen the criminal law, and many regard the directions, at least one of the directions that they moved in was misguided and has indeed been overturned by a superior court in Ontario quite recently. This is a fundamental thing. and I think best explained by a statement made by the Canadian Chiefs of Police at the time, that they believe that the most effective manner in which to reduce victimization by chronic offenders is simply to incarcerate them for periods of time that are commensurate with their pattern of offending. And this resolution would change the criminal code to allow that to happen. It's also worth noting that during our budget considerations in support of budget requests for police, information has come out about the number of chronic offenders in the Coquitlam area, and generally it's believed that 80% of the crime in this district is committed by 20% of the people. Now, in response to that, there has been some action taken by a local detachment. They actually have a prolific offender target team, which has been enjoying some success, but I want to give them some more tools. And on the matter of that success, they've been so successful that they were profiled in the fall edition of the Pony Express magazine. And it sounds like an exciting place to work, because that story starts with this sentence: lurking in abandoned warehouses, hiding out in dark surveillance vans, and masked in ordinary clothes are the members of Coquitlam, BC's prolific target team, who are working to put away the area's most active offenders. And I say hear, hear to that. This is to give them, not to give them more tools, it's actually give the prosecutors, the Crown attorneys, more tools to handle prolific offenders. We hear about revolving door justice too often. Criminal code has not been amended to reflect the requests that came from the FCM that originated with the chiefs of police, and therefore I believe we should start this process again and see if we can get it on the table in front of Federal Minister of Justice and the Federal Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a constant discussion item during my meetings with our Superintendent of Police, Claude Wilcott, and with members of our force. There's no question that the catch and release program, as it's sometimes called, doesn't work very well with prolific offenders. We focus a lot of attention as a community, as our force does, on that small percentage of criminals who cause almost all of the crime, almost all of the thefts, almost all of the robbery. And it must be incredibly disheartening for our members of our police force to spend more time on the paperwork than the criminal spends in jail. In fact, some of those folks spend less time in jail than it takes to read out this very well-written notice of motion. We've got to find a solution to that, because we put too much resources into keeping our community safe, and every time a prolific offender gets released, we're finding them back in jail relatively quickly, but with a relatively short sentence. And so while I respect the work that judges do, clearly the law and the legal system is not serving the communities well when a prolific offender can be convicted 50 times, 60 times of the same crime and get incredibly short jail terms, and sometimes no jail terms. We have to do more. This is incredibly costly to our community. One criminal that goes around and breaks windows in cars can cause thousands of dollars in damage to get pennies out of motor vehicles. When they're put in jail, it costs almost nothing to keep them in jail for a little bit, because they're not in jail long enough. And then they're back out causing more and more damage to our community and more feelings of violation among our citizens. So I applaud this motion. I think we should take it to the federal government and call for action in this regard. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate Councillor O'Neill's having brought this to our attention, and I'll certainly be voting in support of it. I wanted to further say, and in hopes that people watching might go a little deeper into the report, I really appreciate the fact that Resolution 09/2008 was attached, so we can see in full detail what the recommendation is that we're voting on. Thank you.
Councillor Espenson.
Well, Thank you very much. I support this. I seconded Councillor O'Neill's motion on this issue. And this has been an issue that we've been dealing with, I think as the Mayor mentioned, from our police service, the RCMP. We created the crime reduction strategy, and one of the main focuses of the crime reduction strategy was taking teams and focusing on crime hotspots and the perpetrators of those crimes, which are generally prolific offenders. And when you take out the prolific offenders that we've seen, your property crime in that area drops considerably. And you'll find that property crime is probably the public's biggest issue for their lack of safety in their community, the violation that they feel on property crime. We talk about all the other violence that may happen, but property crime hits home to people. It affects them where they live, the safety within their own home. And it's a big, big issue for people in our community. And the justice system has been a revolving door on these people that keep coming back into our system. They need to be incarcerated longer. They need to get also within that longer period of time into treatment and issues that need to deal with their reasons for being prolific offenders, because there's underlying reasons within there. So I think Councillor O'Neill, and I thank him for bringing this issue, is very appropriate, especially when we got our Ipsos Reads poll, which I think is great every year because we get this information, we see these trends, and we understand the issues coming from our police department and the frustrations that, and I could never be a police officer. You got to look at the frustrations that you're dealing with. Arresting a person for property crime, catching with the goods, sending them through the system, and I think one guy had 90 convictions and he had 42 days in jail. And, you know, that's got to be terribly frustrating for our officers out there trying to keep us safe and protect us. So, Councillor O'Neill, thank you for this motion. I support it wholeheartedly. And from the Mayor's comments to our provincial and federal counterparts, let's get on with this. Let's fix this. Let's deal with this. And let's put the resources into this to get this, make our community safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Skor.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, it's very easy to knock the judges. You know, I hear this every day on the street, you know, that the judge didn't do this right, the judge didn't do this right. I mean, why do we have judges? To make a decision. I mean, when I sat on a bench for the immigration department, I made a decision as a judge. And if the federal government didn't like what I made the decision, they can appeal it. They can't overrule me, but they can appeal it to the Supreme Court of Canada. British Columbia government can appeal it to the Supreme Court also, if they wish. But they cannot overrule or appeal it if they want to. But they can't overrule a judge. And neither can a judge. You have a head judge for all the judges. Neither can that judge come and say to me, you made an error, you made a mistake, because guess what? He'd be gone the next day. And that's a fact. It's very, very firm, the power that the judges have. And why do they make these kind of decisions? I had about probably 5,000 cases I listened to. Not ever did I have an appeal. And I've had even other judges say, Sikora, you're going to get, we had meetings once a month that say, you're going to get appealed on this case, and this case. Never got an appeal because I made a decision what I think was right. And the way it was written up, the fact is that there's no room for appeal, okay? But the fact is, you know, for us to say somehow that we are going to ask the federal government to make a mandatory sentence, they can't. They can't. The judge must hear the case, and the judge decides on every case of what's the right charge or what sentence it should be. So I'm talking from experience, okay? So you don't start saying to the federal government, please, you know, this guy stole the car and he stole 20 cars. After 20 cars, he should get a life sentence. You know, everybody's got a different reason why a guy should get 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, or whatever it is. Let the judges do their work, believe me. There's, how many have you appealed, has there been appeals? There have been by provincial government, maybe one or two in 40 years. But the federal government, I don't know that there's been any. maybe there was, okay? But the fact, I mean, here we're asking for the federal government to impose a mandatory sentence. In other words, I'm sitting on a bench as a judge, all of a sudden the federal government comes to me, Sikora, you got to give that guy 10 years. It ain't gonna happen, not in a million years. So, with all due respect, I'd like to get these people off the street too. But it doesn't work that way. Okay? So I mean, I know that I'm gonna probably be booed and maybe some write-ups in the paper how negative I was about the mandatory sentences, because I know how it works, okay? So I will not be supporting it.
Okay. I'm going to ask Councillor O'Neill to wrap up.
Yes, thank you very much. I believe that when this resolution first went through the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and then the FCM, that it was vetted by their legal departments and supported as something that was enactable. And certainly there are times within the criminal code that there's very clear instruction about what the sort of sentencing should be. Judges do not have the absolute right in every case to set the sentence, such as if you're convicted of first-degree murder, there's a minimum amount of time that you have to be in jail before you're eligible for parole. The judge can't say upon a conviction of first-degree murder that that person should just get out after 6 months because for some extenuating reasons. There's a minimum amount of time that that person has to go to jail. And working within the minimum, from that minimum to the maximum, the judge does have some discretion. And that sort of principle takes place all the way through the criminal code. So I believe that this is a correct, legally sort of correct. It's not presuming something that can't happen. I think it's the sort of thing that the federal government can put into place. So that's how I'm going to wrap it up by urging. It would be very good to have unanimous consent on this one, unanimous support. I think the people of Coquitlam deserve this. If you talk to people about crime, and it's not a huge issue. The crime issue is not the biggest issue in Coquitlam. But when you're talking about crime, what the sort of crime that is a big issue is property crime. The property crime is committed by chronic offenders. So trying to find a definition in the criminal code of to define a chronic offender and then to have some sort of escalating sentencing attached to that. I certainly don't want to send it too low, and our government would never do that, I'm sure. I think would go a long way to adding to the peace and security of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, in a couple of weeks, we'll have to pass a budget that adds elements of law enforcement to our community because of those very questions that we have to address. And we could keep adding police and police and police if we choose, but it would be much more cost effective if we could find a way to address an issue as big as the one that the Chiefs of Police Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police have identified. So thank you. The motion is before us. All those in favor? All those opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. The motion carries almost unanimously.
Almost.
Almost.
Your Worship, that's the last formal item on this evening's agenda.
Thank you very much. I do want to make two quick comments on behalf of Council. Yesterday, several members of Council joined in a ceremony of commemoration on the grounds of Riverview Hospital, specifically on the grounds of the cemetery at Riverview. The ceremony was to acknowledge, it was perhaps even the first time in the history of Riverview where a ceremony was held there other than a funeral. And these are primarily patients, but some of them were staff. Some of them were family of patients that were buried over the course of 60 years on the grounds of Riverview Hospital. We cast petals upon the headstones of the hundreds of former patients, primarily at Riverview Hospital, and I want to thank Reverend Dr. David Spence for setting up for organizing that tribute to those people with mental illness who, in many cases in the past, had been forgotten and left in a facility that was an asylum, admittedly, but primarily to store and to give residence to people with mental illness rather than to treat them. We do better than that today, we hope, although not in every case, clearly. But on Sunday we were able to pay tribute to those people buried at Riverview Hospital. I also want to express, on behalf of Council, the best wishes, the prayers, and the condolences to the people of the Philippines. We have in our community, in the Tri-Cities, more than 5,000 Filipino residents of the Tri-Cities, people who have come here over sometimes many generations, but in many cases very recently, to make a new home in Coquitlam in Canada. In fact, on Saturday night, Councillors Reid and Socorro and myself joined with the Filipino community at a dinner that had been established long before the tragedy that befell the island nation a couple of weeks ago, a tragedy that is costing thousands of lives and leaves them completely, in many communities in the Philippines, without food, without water, and with despair that's unimaginable. Some of our churches right here in Coquitlam do some great work in the Philippines. I know that Coquitlam Alliance Church, for example, the church that Councillor Aspen attends, is involved in the Philippines, and other churches are as well. And so, in fact, more than 15 years ago, Coquitlam established an administrative relationship with the city of Ormoc in the Philippines, a city not much larger than Coquitlam, about 190,000 people. And Ormoc, it turns out, has been heavily damaged by all of reports by the typhoon. And it kind of echoes perhaps something that happened in 1991, our 100th anniversary as a city, and Ormoc was leveled by massive flooding that killed more than 8,000 people. And so now they're facing 22 years later, some of the same kind of devastation. So we, as a community, join with our Filipino residents here in Coquitlam and in the Tri-Cities with our prayers, our thoughts, our condolences for those who've lost loved ones, and for those who don't know yet the fate of their loved ones back in the Philippines. We ask our residents please to consider contributing to the Canadian Red Cross or to the various churches and charities that are rushing to the aid of the people of the Philippines. And I want to thank all of Council. We had a strong discussion, an informal discussion today about how our community might best be able to help, and we look to our residents and our community to put your arms around those from the Philippines, and let's do our best to help. Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. With no further other business, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Hodge to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. This is one of my photos from Riverview. We'll now have a question period, which is, we'll have up to 15 minutes of questions on tonight's agenda. The Mayor will introduce question period. We're allowed a maximum of 2 minutes. Are there any questions on tonight's agenda? Are there any questions on tonight's agenda? They have to be on tonight's agenda. Any questions at all on tonight's agenda? We've only been here since 9 o'clock, so please. Okay, seeing none. Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.